Can you believe it? It is actually, you can see that, Tuesday, November 30th, 3:15 in the afternoon. And I just got delivery of this box from Squire. Squire's the people that have been making the harness for the 68 Charger to make the Hemi run. The last day of November, it shows up. Now let's see what's inside the box. What's in the box? What's in the box? Received September 13th. See that, kids? Not quite 3 months, but pretty damn close to it. All right, let's see what we got here. There's the other sensor for the tone ring. Here's the harness. Lay all this out. This is where it comes through the firewall with the big grommet. This is the engine side. You can tell by all the fuel injector connectors and stuff here. This is wheel speed sensor left and right, so that goes to those sensors on the back of the transmission. This right here says driver side knock sensor. So that's nice, they're clearly labeled. I like that. Air temp sensor. All right, cool. That's the harness. And now the fun begins. I started last night in anticipation of this coming because I got tracking number last week of testing my fuel system. And actually put a gauge on here since you last saw it. Got this line here because of course I had a leak. And I checked my line. My lines were actually fine going to the engine. It's this stupid 90-degree fitting here, 8AN 90-degree female to male. And this fitting I got off Amazon. And unfortunately it's a no-name brand. I had 2 of them. I switched out for another one, they both leaked. And come to find out it's some no-name, again, Amazon crap. And here's another one I've got. And it just leaks. It doesn't have enough depth or something in it, and it just leaks. So I end up buying a name brand off of Summit, overnighted it, it'll be here tomorrow. And hopefully that's gonna fix my fuel leak, because when I pressurize it, it actually drips from right here. Right in that connection there is where it drips. So I gotta have it. So, of course, I laid everything out before I started working, and I looked at the harness and it says I had to hook to the brake light switch, and I started looking at stuff on here, and yeah, it's this right here. See that? My brake light switch is a 2-wire round cylinder. That's not gonna fit. So of course, you don't know all this till you get in here and start working. I called Chris, Hotwire Auto. He goes, oh yeah, you gotta have the LX, the 06 up, basically, brake light switch. I was like, man, I wish I would have known that, you know. So of course I've scrapped the car. I don't have access to it anymore. So I just had to buy a brake light switch, Mopar parts, $23 from Amazon. It'll be here in 2 days. I don't have the bracket for it either, so I'm gonna have to MacGyver something in here, but I gotta have the brake light switch to hook into this, because you have to have the brake light switch for the new car to run this, and that's something obviously they don't tell you, which is aggravating as hell. Which is our transmission plug. So we'll start sliding the harness up here. So that's gonna go through like so. Already pre-drilled that hole there. That's gonna drop in. I'm gonna start feeding other stuff through here. Engine temp sensor, air conditioning. Now we got the majority of the wires pushed through. The only one not pushed through yet is the actual ground wire here. And I'll do it last, and then we'll push the whole shoot match here up in there. This rubber grommet will actually go in there, and it's gonna seal off the hole nice and easy. That'll go in there, and it'll be just like factory, keep it waterproof. That's a bunch of wires to go through. Everything else stays inside and goes to the various sensors in here, and then all this conglomeration here has to go inside for the computers and fuse block and everything else. All right, so there's your weatherproof plug plugged into the hole. It's great, ba-boom. But here's this huge harness coming through, and I gotta tuck it all in, but for now we're gonna just leave it there, and I'm gonna plug everything in. We're trying to get the car running, but between that stupid brake light switch I've got to order and hook up, the next thing is I got the harness in here and got it pulled through, and you pull everything through on the passenger side first. You pull everything on the passenger side first, so it comes out right over in there. You can kind of see where it comes out. And pull everything passenger side, what I did, and then you start pulling everything over the driver's side. I did pull the intake manifold off, but it was for a reason. I didn't have to do that to pull the harness until I got down to the engine temp sensor here. Engine temp sensor and the air condition. So let me show you what that looks like. This is the air condition compressor right here, and it runs down here to this. But the problem is, when I tried to loop it around the back of the motor here and around the intake manifold, it was short. It was short by about 3 inches from plugging into the sensor. The only way it's gonna fit properly, you gotta pull your intake manifold off, run those wires through here for your engine temp sensor and your air conditioner, and just run it in and down. Then you got plenty of room, no issue whatsoever. So now that I have that figured out, everything else is actually in place. All these will actually snap in. I'm gonna go ahead and put the intake manifold back on. You'll just notice here everything else is fine. I got it out of the way, drop it back down. Gotta find how I'm gonna hide all this crap. Good luck, that's a big harness to hide. Then I got these wires to hook up here. Shifter, accelerator pedal, and brake light switch. And what else we got here? So this is a gas pedal, brake light switch, shifter. Those are the main ones to plug in. Then I got the red, which is looks like 12 volts all the time. This yellow one here is the starter, so it goes to my push button starter. This is ignition run for the key 12 volts basically. That's easy enough to figure out. And then blue wires here, we've got AC compressor, tachometer, brake light switch output. That'll come from the other side of my brake pedal there. So those are pretty. Is actually under the car. The tone ring that tells it when the actual transmission's moving so it can shift. This thing is too big. It doesn't clear the cross member, which I was very concerned about beforehand. This is the adapter I used to go from a 3-bolt style to a 1350 on the drive shaft. And this is 5 1/4 inch. When I put that on here, this is 6 1/4. So this is very tight but has clearance. This is not. So that 1/2 inch of difference makes a big difference. It actually hits. So that's not gonna work. So I reached out to Chris, sending pictures of all this stuff, my measurements and all. For this to work properly, this ring has to be pretty much the same diameter as this, with the teeth hanging off of it, because I gotta have room for that ring to spin, and I've gotta have room for these sensors. These 2 sensors have to be on it, simulating each wheel, like an ABS system type of thing. So that sucks. That's a major stopping point there. All right, so I thought about it last night. I decided to mark out where my adapter goes here, and I decided to start cutting down and use the notches down here as my new ring. So I need to go down, so I'm actually cutting it, and I'm gonna cut these other pieces away. Hope to make a smaller diameter ring, see if that'll fit. Worst case, I gotta buy a new tone ring. If I'm trying to do this on my own, I've not heard from Chris. He's out in Arizona, so we're gonna try to come up with our own solution. Stay tuned. All right, so here's what it looks like. It sticks over 1/4 inch, which should give me the clearance I need. And basically I made it look like kind of like a saw blade. So this was the actual inside of the tone ring. So to make it all consistent, I cut what was above it out, and because you can't get in there, I had to cut at an angle. So I made it look like a saw blade the way I cut down at an angle, but I tried to keep it consistent, so each one of these has about the same width. I went back and sanded it with my file, but this is what it looks like. So hopefully this is consistent as my sensor looks at it. It'll be the same scenario that we were trying to go with originally, except now this should fit. You see I got my 3 holes lined up in the center there. So now I've got to put it on the car and make sure it spins freely, and if it does, bolt it all up and figure out how I'm going to hook my sensors up to it, which these are ABS sensors here, and I got to figure out how to get these to slide in, and they're actually going to look at this, and they have got to have a little bit of a gap to them. So you see how much room I've got to have to get all this to work, and it's really tight in there. All right, the good news is my mod worked. See, this is centered and it turns freely without hitting anything, which is great. I've got clearance on this side, the top, the side there, and the bottom. I mean, it's real close, but it does not hit at the bottom, which is good. So now I've got to figure out where to put my sensors, probably on each side here, but I've got to figure out how to custom mount and everything. So basically this is going to go like that. See how it lines up with the 3-prong of the transmission, and then my adapter goes on, which looks like this, and will line up like so, like that. Okay, and then I got to put my bolts through it to tighten that up. Once that is all tight in there, that'll be set, and then I just got to hook up the sensors somehow, because these plugs have to go to it, which sends a signal to the transmission. So now I got to figure out how to mount those sensors, because they gave me no brackets. It's all up to me to figure that out. So I don't know if I can mount it like out here somehow and have the sensor pointing down and just hook these to it, but the drive shaft's going to go here and it bolts up to there. So at least I was able to make it clear. You can see it is still tight, but it does clear and it does spin freely, which is great. Okay, work it out, hot rod. All right, because my adapter didn't come with the proper size bolts, I had to go to the hardware store, and I bought some bolts here. Pull them out so you can see them. These are M12 by 45 millimeter long, fully threaded. They have the Allen head on them, and they have a metric locking nut there that matches it. And these are going to go through, and they're the right length, and they'll be good to go. I was going to use the factory stuff, but it just wasn't going to work out. So we're going to put these in, get it all bolted up and tightened down, and then figure out how to mount the sensors. All right, I made a bracket here, a little L bracket. If I can fix this so you can see it better. Made a little L bracket right here to hold the sensor, bolted it to it here, and bolted it down to the cross member bracket here. It holds the sensor. You can see the gap in there on it, and when I turn this, you'll see the gap between it. Can you see that? See if I can give you a little bit better light on it. As I turn this, you'll see how it passes over the sensor, right? Now I just have to do that on the other side. And there you go, that should be enough. The only problem is the other side, the sensor, the way the sensor mounts at the flat side has to go toward the little sprocket there. And unfortunately, when you, on this side, the way the flat is, the bolt hole is going down, but on the opposite side, where the flat side goes toward the sprocket, the bolt hole is going up. So it's gonna make my bracket a little different. So I can't make the same bracket, I gotta make a little bit different bracket, but that's what I'm working on now. All right, so a quick little recap. Did some wiring this evening when I got home from work. And what we got here is my bus bar. I got my main power from the battery coming all the way through. It's actually coming through the hole where the old speedometer cable was. I'm gonna terminate it somewhere up in here, not sure where yet. But it comes into here. This red wire here was usually from the battery going up here to the little starter solenoid. From there was a wire I had going over here. That's actually an inline fuse that I had. I'd already upgraded that because the factory one was kind of in bad shape. And what I did was, there's a black wire that goes from here to the alternator. I cut it, attached it to the red, and they both are attached together. They go into this fuse, and this fuse goes down here and gets power directly from the battery. So this is just like it was from the factory, except now I'm feeding voltage into the black and the red into the car. And because I have the dash out, and I'm changing the ammeter gauge to a volt gauge, on the back of that gauge are these two wires. You'll notice one red, one black. I'm gonna actually cut these, splice those together, heat shrink it, and then that'll be making connection. So basically what we're doing is we're taking two ways of feeding voltage into the car from each circuit. So the car is gonna power up just like it did before, but all the load from the alternator is going out to the battery. It's not coming through here anymore, so it's gonna make that a lot safer. But this is the push button that I got to start the car up with. Because on these old Mopars, you've got to have the 12-volt signal going to the car and the harness and everything, the computers, but you don't want to interrupt the starter circuit by turning the key forward. So you've got to have 12 volts going to the solenoid from the battery, push the button and start the battery separate from the 12 volts going to the computer, so they don't ever lose 12 volts. So anyway, this is push button that I got, and I'm wiring it up now. And I had to find a place to mount this little push button somewhere kind of incognito, if you will. So I've got my dash tore apart here, and clearly right here got the steering column dropped right here inside the hole. I drilled a little hole right here. It's actually going to stick down like this, and it's kind of right under, if you will, the key there, right here. So it's kind of out of the way, kind of hidden, little anti-theft, if you will. It's going to go right in there, and you can adjust the height on it, so it's kind of out of the way. It's going to look something like that. And then they got this other rubber button that goes on top of it. Anyway, I'm getting ready to mount that up, run some wires through here for battery and 12 volt and all that good stuff, and try to figure out all the connections. I've got my brake switch mounted up there. I took the factory bracket, drilled a universal hole in it so I could get the snap in place, and then run the wires to it, so that's going to work out fine. Ran the fuel pump wire under the carpet and back there, the shifter wires and everything up, started cutting the floor mounts off of there, and yeah, I've got to figure out where I'm going to put all that stuff, but pretty much trying to get all the wiring in here dialed in. And then I've got to go to the parts store and get a new two new cables, one for the alternator because the factory wire on here is too small a gauge, like 14 gauge. Get like a 6 gauge to go to alternator, and then get a new wire to go directly to the starter from the battery. Bus bar I've got up there. All right, so I have mounted my bus bar here for my power. I put a 200 amp fuse coming in from the battery here before the bus bar. From the bus bar, I've got a big 6 gauge wire going to here, which is my old ignition switch module. From there, I've got another number 6 wire that goes all the way over to the starter. And then from there, a 6 gauge wire that goes from there to the alternator. actually to this another 200 amp fuse, and from there it goes to the alternator. So now I have 200 amp fuse from the alternator to the battery, and I have a 200 amp fuse from the battery to the fuse block. So 200 amp fuse, 2 different fuses, one from the alternator, one from the battery, just to have that extra fuse protection. Going into the car, I have a 50 amp fuse here. I've also cut the original black wire off from here where it was going from the alternator. That's tied into the red wire, and they're both fed from the same spot here. Pressure is charging. Things looking good. Letting it run in a little bit. Get that power steering ready. Reverse lights on? Yes, they are. And here's my drive-by wire. Checklist today. I got my electric fans wired, got 2 relays here, going to my control here for the battery, my bus bar. The wires going inside to my PAC 2800 fan controller, and all the stuff's mounted down here. But this is the PAC 2800 fan controller, this is the TAC adapter, and this is the OBD adapter. Anyway, I'll go into more detail about that later. Just shoved all the stuff here. I've also got the factory console back in here, even though it's not exactly where it should be. It's shifted back slightly. I got the 06 shifter in, kind of halfway mounted here. Got my console lights hooked up. I got the wires hooked in here for the shifter so the lights come on with it. I got my dash put back together with the cluster bolted down, the steering column back up. And I got the gas pedal mounted down there. Had to cut it and modify it a little bit, which I'll go into more detail about that later. Add extra ground wire from the frame to the bell housing where the harness is grounded to the same bolt, because that's where they want to ground it. I just wanted to get an extra engine ground going. I've been out here for about 12 hours today trying to get this thing done and finished up a little bit. So everything's not perfect, but at least the shifter and the gas pedal's mounted so I can try to drive it. But I still need to make sure the radiator system's burped and the transmission fluid's where it needs to be. Just like that. A Ford guy put a Gen 3 Hemi in a 68 Charger.